The luxury suite door slammed so hard the crystal chandelier trembled, but Angelina Jolie didn't care about the five-star amenities anymore. Not after what she'd just witnessed. Her hands were still shaking, mud from the Cambodian fields caked under her manicured nails, and for the first time in her 25 years of life, the Hollywood starlet couldn't recognize the woman staring back at her from the gilded mirror. The transformation had already begun, though she didn't know yet that within hours she would make a phone call that would redirect millions of dollars and reshape her entire existence. It had started as just another film project. Tomb Raider was supposed to be her breakthrough into action blockbusters, a chance to prove she was more than just the wild child who had won an Oscar. The studio executives had warned her about the conditions in Cambodia, suggested she use a body double for the jungle scenes. She had laughed at their concerns. After all, she was Angelina Jolie, daughter of Hollywood royalty, fearless and untouchable. How wrong she had been about everything. The morning had begun typically enough. The wake-up call at 4:30, the convoy of air-conditioned vehicles waiting outside the hotel, her personal assistant handing her the usual green juice. The film crew was already at the Angkor Wat Temple complex, setting up for the day's shoot. Simon West, the director, had promised they would wrap the Cambodia portion within 3 weeks. Quick, efficient, minimal interaction with the locals beyond what was necessary for the film. That was the plan. But plans have a way of unraveling in places where reality refuses to be ignored. The first sign something would be different came when their convoy took a wrong turn. The local driver, a quiet man named Saroon, had misunderstood the directions to the new shooting location. Instead of the cleared, secured path the location scouts had prepared, they found themselves on a dirt road leading through an actual village. Not a film set designed to look like poverty, but real poverty, the kind that Hollywood had taught Angelina to avoid seeing. The production manager was furious, shouting into his walkie-talkie about lost time and insurance liabilities, but Angelina had already stepped out of the vehicle. The smell hit her first, not unpleasant, just different. Cooking fires, tropical vegetation, and something else she couldn't identify. Life, perhaps. Raw, unfiltered life. Children appeared first, as they always do. Curious faces peering around wooden structures that could barely be called houses. But something was wrong with this picture. Several of the children were missing limbs. One boy, perhaps 7 years old, navigated expertly on makeshift crutches, his left leg gone from the knee down. A girl, even younger, sat in the doorway, both arms ending at the elbows. The translator, hired by the production, tried to usher Angelina back to the vehicle. Landmine victims, he explained quickly, as if those 2 words could encompass the enormity of what she was seeing. From the war. Very common here. We should go, Miss Jolie. But Angelina's feet had become roots. The boy on crutches had moved closer, his eyes bright with intelligence and something else. Hope? No, that wasn't quite right. It was simply life, continuing despite everything. He said something in Khmer, and surprisingly, he was smiling. What did he say? Angelina asked the translator. The man hesitated. He wants to know if you are the movie star who fights bad guys. He saw a poster in the city. Before anyone could stop her, Angelina had knelt in the dirt. Designer jeans be damned. Tell him yes, she said. Tell him I pretend to fight bad guys. The boy laughed, actually laughed, and launched into an animated story, gesturing with his crutches. Other children gathered, and soon Angelina was surrounded. The translator struggled to keep up. He says he wants to be in movies too, but first he needs to learn to read. The school was destroyed. His mother was... This was the moment everything shifted, though it would take Angelina years to fully understand it. The production manager was practically pulling his hair out. They were now 40 minutes behind schedule, burning through thousands of dollars each minute. But Angelina wasn't listening to his protests anymore. She was watching the girl without arms carefully pick up a pencil with her feet, drawing in the dirt. She was seeing resilience that made every Hollywood struggle story seem like fiction. How many? Angelina asked the translator. How many landmines are still out there? Millions, he replied. Maybe 4 or 5 million. Nobody knows for sure. Cambodia has more amputees per capita than any country in the world. The statistics should have been numbing, but instead it was like a key turning in a lock she didn't know existed. One of the mothers had approached, carrying a baby. She spoke rapidly to the translator, gesturing at Angelina, then at her child. The translator's face grew uncomfortable. She asks if you can help. Her baby is sick, the nearest hospital is 2 days away, and she has no money for transport. This was the protocol violation the studio had warned about. Don't get involved. Don't make promises. Don't create dependencies. The lawyers had been very clear about liability and the dangers of setting precedents, but looking at that baby, feverish and listless, Angelina felt something crack inside her chest. "No, not crack, break open, get her to a hospital," she told the production manager. "Use my car, use the medical team we have on standby. Angelina, we can't use my car." Her voice had changed. This wasn't the playful rebel who kissed her brother at the Oscars or wore blood in a vial around her neck. This was something else entirely. "And call the studio, tell them I need to speak with them tonight." But here's what the world didn't know, what even Angelina didn't fully grasp in that moment. The village they had accidentally discovered was built on a former battlefield. Every step the children took to school, every trip to fetch water, was a gamble with death. The ground itself was poisoned with the remnants of war, a war that had ended before some of these children were even born. The boy on crutches had taken her hand, his small fingers gripping hers with surprising strength. He led her through the village, other children following like a parade of broken butterflies. They showed her the school, 4 posts and a partial roof. They showed her the well that had been contaminated when someone tried to dig it deeper and hit an unexploded shell. They showed her the cemetery, where markers were often just piles of stones, too many dated within the last year. But they also showed her their drawings, scratched into any surface they could find. They sang songs. The boy on crutches demonstrated how fast he could run, his single leg and dual crutches moving in a rhythm that defied physics and pity alike. They were not asking for sympathy. They were simply living, with a grace that made Angelina's previous understanding of strength seem like a joke. The production manager had given up, was on his phone explaining the delay to Los Angeles. The other actors in the convoy, all except one, stayed in their air-conditioned vehicles. But Angelina walked through the entire village, the translator struggling to keep pace with the questions from both sides. The children wanted to know about America, about movies, about her airplane. She wanted to know about their dreams, their families, their hopes. It was the girl without arms who delivered the blow that would redirect Angelina's entire life. Through the translator, she said, "I want to be a doctor. I will find a way to help people, even like this." She demonstrated how she could hold things between her chin and shoulder, how she had adapted, overcome, survived. The word survived echoed in Angelina's mind. These children hadn't just survived. They were thriving in conditions that would break most adults she knew. They were finding joy in circumstances that Hollywood would consider too depressing for audiences. They were living proof that humans could endure anything and still choose hope. When the security team finally insisted they leave, the insurance company was threatening to pull coverage for the entire film. Angelina took one last look at the village. The boy on crutches waved goodbye, calling out something in Khmer. "What did he say?" she asked the translator one more time. "He said, 'See you tomorrow, movie star.'" But Angelina knew she couldn't come back tomorrow. The shooting schedule had them at a different location, miles away. The production would make sure they never took this route again. These children would wake up tomorrow, and she would be gone, back to her scripted fights with imaginary villains, while they continued their real battle with the deadly ground beneath their feet. The ride back to the hotel was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. The other actors tried to make conversation, to lighten the mood, but Angelina stared out the window, watching Cambodia scroll by, a country she realized she knew nothing about. The Khmer Rouge, the killing fields, the genocide that had eliminated a quarter of the population, it was all just history she had skimmed in a briefing packet. But those children were living with the consequences every day. That evening she had been scheduled for a dinner with government officials, a public relations event to thank the Cambodian authorities for their cooperation with the film. She was supposed to wear the designer dress her stylist had selected, make small talk, pose for photos that would show Hollywood's gratitude to the host country. Instead, she locked herself in her suite and made a phone call that would change everything. But first, she stood in front of that mirror, seeing herself clearly for perhaps the first time. The daughter of Jon Voight, the wild child of Hollywood, the actress who had built a career on being shocking and unpredictable. What had any of it meant? What had any of it contributed to the world? She had an Oscar on her shelf and a reputation for danger, but that little girl without arms had more purpose in her adapted grip than Angelina had in her entire body. The phone call was to her business manager in Los Angeles. It was 2 a.m. there, but she didn't care. When he answered, groggy and confused, she didn't even say hello. "How much money do I have?" she asked. "Angelina? What's wrong? Are you in trouble? How much money do I have, available, liquid, that I can move immediately?" There was a pause, the sound of shuffling papers. "After the Tomb Raider fee comes through, about $12 million. Why? What's happening?" $12 million. It was more money than most people would see in several lifetimes. It was also enough to clear landmines from significant areas, to build schools, to provide prosthetics for dozens of children. It was enough to actually make a difference, not just pose for charity photos at galas. "I need you to set up a foundation," she said. "Tonight, or today, whatever time it is there. I need it operational as soon as possible." "Angelina, that's not how it works. There are lawyers to consult, tax implications to consider." "Then wake up the lawyers. Wake up everyone." This was the part the media would later romanticize, but the truth was messier. Her manager thought she was having a breakdown. Her agent, when he heard about it the next morning, flew into a panic about her image and marketability. The studio executives held emergency meetings about whether their star was becoming a liability. Everyone had opinions about what Angelina should do with her money, her time, her fame, but none of them had looked into the eyes of a 7-year-old landmine survivor who still had hope. None of them had seen children drawing their dreams in the dirt with their feet because their arms had been blown off by a war they weren't even alive to witness. None of them understood that sometimes a person doesn't choose their purpose. Sometimes it chooses them, violently, unexpectedly, in a wrong turn down a dirt road. The next morning, she was back on set, delivering her lines, performing her stunts. But between takes, she was on the phone with humanitarian organizations. During lunch breaks, she was reading reports about landmine removal, about the cost per square meter, about the technology available. Her co-star found her one evening surrounded by maps of Cambodia, marking the most heavily mined areas with a red pen. "You know you can't save them all," he said, not unkindly. Angelina looked up at him, and there was something different in her eyes. Not the wild spark that Hollywood loved to photograph, but something deeper, more focused. "No," she agreed, "but I can save some, and some is better than none." The transformation wasn't instant or smooth. She made mistakes. Her first attempts at charity work were clumsy, sometimes doing more harm than good. She trusted the wrong people, funded projects that failed, made promises she couldn't keep. The media mocked her, calling it another phase, another attention-seeking gesture from Hollywood's wild child. They compared it to her blood vial necklace, her knife collection, her tattooed declarations of love. They were waiting for her to get bored, to move on to the next shocking thing. But they didn't understand what had happened in that village. They didn't understand that once you've seen children navigating minefields to get water, you can't unsee it. Once you've met a girl who dreams of being a doctor despite having no arms, you can't go back to thinking your problems matter in the same way. 3 months after finishing Tomb Raider, Angelina returned to Cambodia. This time it wasn't for a movie. She came with mine-clearing equipment, with medical supplies, with educational materials. She found the village again, despite the production company's refusal to provide the exact location. It took her 3 days of searching, but she found it. The boy on crutches recognized her immediately. He called out in English this time. He had been practicing. "Movie star, you came back." She had come back, and she would keep coming back. Cambodia would become her second home, the place where she would later adopt her first son, Maddox. But that was still in the future. In that moment she was just keeping a promise that she hadn't actually made, except perhaps to herself. The village had gathered to see what the Hollywood star had brought. There were expectations. She could feel them. These people had been disappointed by promises before, by aid organizations that came for photos and left with nothing changed. They watched her with a mixture of hope and skepticism that she would come to recognize in refugee camps and disaster zones around the world. What happened next would define the rest of her life. Not the movies, not the marriages, not the scandals. This moment. She didn't give a speech. She didn't pose for photos. Instead, she sat down with the village elders and asked through her translator, "What do you need most?" And then, and this was the crucial part, she listened. She took notes. She asked follow-up questions. She treated them not as photo opportunities, but as human beings with expertise about their own lives. The list was practical, not dramatic. Clean water, mine clearance for the paths to the nearest town, school supplies, basic medical training for someone in the village, transportation for emergencies. It wasn't the stuff of Hollywood endings, but it was the stuff of life. Over the next year, every item on that list was addressed. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but steadily. The mine-clearing team she hired found and destroyed 47 devices along the main path. The well was properly dug and protected. A young woman from the village was trained as a medical aide. The school got walls and a proper roof. But here's what really mattered. None of this made the news immediately. Angelina didn't call press conferences or issue statements. She did the work quietly, learning as she went, making mistakes and fixing them. The boy on crutches got prosthetics that actually fit, that actually worked. The girl without arms got specialized tools that allowed her to write, to study, to pursue her dream of medicine. Years later, when Angelina had become a UN Goodwill ambassador, when she had adopted 3 children and given birth to 3 more, when she had directed films about war and survival, journalists would ask her when she knew her life had changed. They expected her to cite a dramatic moment, a single epiphany, but the truth was more complex. It wasn't just seeing the landmine victims, though that was part of it. It wasn't just the boy on crutches or the girl without arms, though they had been catalysts. It was the moment in her hotel room, looking in that mirror, when she realized that her entire life had been preparation for something she hadn't known was coming. Every rebellion, every wild choice, every moment of refusing to conform, it had all been building her into someone who could walk away from the safe path and choose the harder one. The phone call to her business manager that night had lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, he understood that this wasn't a phase or a publicity stunt. This was a fundamental shift in who Angelina Jolie was going to be in the world. The wild child was growing up, not into conformity, but into purpose. Within 6 months, she had quietly donated over $1 million to landmine removal in Cambodia. Within a year, she was on the ground in Sierra Leone, Tanzania, and Pakistan. Within 2 years, she was speaking at the United Nations, using the fame she had once wielded for shock value as a weapon against indifference. But it all traced back to that wrong turn, that unplanned detour into a village that wasn't supposed to be part of the story. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives are the ones that aren't in the script. The boy on crutches grew up to become a teacher. He sends Angelina photos sometimes, images of his classroom, his students, his own children, who were born into a world with fewer landmines because someone took a wrong turn and decided to make it right. The girl without arms is in medical school now, specializing in prosthetics and adaptation technology. She wants to help other children find ways to pursue their dreams regardless of physical limitations. They probably don't know that their village changed the course of one of Hollywood's biggest stars. They probably don't realize that their resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship taught a millionaire actress what actually mattered in the world. They were just living their lives, surviving and thriving despite everything, but Angelina knew. Every time she stood before the UN Security Council, every time she visited a refugee camp, every time she used her platform to draw attention to forgotten crises, she remembered that village. She remembered the boy who could run on crutches and the girl who could write with her feet. She remembered the moment in the mirror when she saw herself clearly for the first time. The media would eventually catch up, would document her transformation from wild child to humanitarian. They would win awards for their coverage, write books about her journey, make documentaries about her work, but they would never quite capture the earthquake that happened in her soul that day in Cambodia, the complete reorientation of her understanding of what a life could be for. Because here's what that moment really taught her. Privilege isn't just about having more than others. It's about having the capacity to help and choosing not to look away. Fame isn't just a currency for personal gain, it's a spotlight that can be redirected to illuminate ignored suffering. Money isn't just for security and comfort, it's for building bridges between those who have too much and those who have too little. The Tomb Raider film would go on to be a massive success, launching a franchise and cementing Angelina's status as an action star. But she would barely remember the premiere, the reviews, the box office numbers. What she would remember was the weight of that baby being placed in her arms, the one whose mother had begged for help. The baby survived, by the way. She's a teenager now, healthy and in school. Her mother still lives in the same village, which now has clean water, clear paths, and a school with walls, a roof and books. That's the thing about change, real change, not the Hollywood version. It's slow and unglamorous. It's made up of 1,000 small decisions, 1,000 small actions. It's choosing to return when it would be easier to forget. It's learning from mistakes instead of abandoning the effort. It's understanding that you can't save everyone but refusing to use that as an excuse to save no one. In her hotel room that night, after making the calls that would reshape her future, Angelina finally took a shower. The mud from the village washed away, but the impression remained. She looked at herself in the mirror again. The same face, the same body, but everything had shifted. She was still Angelina Jolie, actress, celebrity, Jon Voight's daughter, but now she was also something else. A witness who had chosen not to look away, a person of means who had chosen to act. The script for the next day's shooting was on her bedside table. She had lines to memorize, stunts to perform, a movie to finish, but between the typed words she saw other scenes: children drawing in the dirt, mothers carrying babies down mine-laden paths, a boy racing on crutches with more joy than she had ever felt on a red carpet. She would finish the movie, she would return to Hollywood, she would continue her career, but she would never be the same person who had left Los Angeles thinking Cambodia was just another location shoot. That person had died somewhere between seeing those landmine victims and making that phone call. What emerged was someone harder and softer at the same time, harder in her determination to make a difference, softer in her understanding of what really mattered. The last thing she did before going to sleep was write a note to herself. Remember the boy on crutches. Remember the girl without arms. Remember that the ground itself can be poisoned by old wars. Remember that children still laugh even when they have every reason not to. Remember that you have the power to clear some of the mines, to build some of the schools, to change some of the stories. Remember that some is better than none. Always remember. She would keep that note for the rest of her life, pulling it out whenever the work got hard, whenever the critics got loud, whenever she wondered if any of it mattered. It did matter. It mattered to a boy who became a teacher, to a girl who became a doctor, to a village that became a little safer, a little more hopeful. Years later, when her own children would ask her why she did what she did, why she traveled to dangerous places, why she spent so much time away from the movie sets that paid for their lives, she would tell them about that wrong turn in Cambodia. She would tell them about the children who had lost limbs but not hope, about the mothers who had lost everything but kept trying, about the moment when she realized that having the ability to help came with the responsibility to do so. But in that hotel room, in those hours between seeing the village and starting her new life, Angelina Jolie sat in silence. Outside, Siem Reap hummed with the noise of a city that never quite slept. Inside, she was calculating, not movie deals or appearance fees, but how many square meters of land could be cleared, how many prosthetics could be provided, how many schools could be built. The woman who had kissed her brother at the Oscars to shock people was planning something truly shocking, using her fame for something that mattered. The actress who had worn her husband's blood in a vial was about to spill her own metaphorical blood in service of strangers. The wild child of Hollywood was about to become something nobody had expected, a force for good in places where good was desperately needed. Tomorrow, she would be Lara Croft again, performing impossible stunts in an imaginary adventure. But tonight, she was just a 25-year-old woman who had seen too much to ever be satisfied with too little again. Tonight, she was making lists and phone calls and plans. Tonight, she was becoming the person those children in the village needed her to be, not a savior, not a hero, but a witness who refused to forget, a person with resources who chose to share them. The transformation was complete, even if it would take years for the world to notice. In a luxury hotel room in Cambodia, surrounded by scripts and schedules and the trappings of fame, Angelina Jolie had found her real role, not the one written by screenwriters, but the one written by conscience and circumstance, and the unbearable clarity that comes from seeing how the world really is for most of its children. The mirror reflected the same face it had that morning, but everything behind it had changed. The wild child was gone. In her place stood a woman with a mission, a purpose that would drive her through controversies and divorces, through adoptions and biological births, through UN appointments and refugee camps, through making films that mattered, and raising children who understood that privilege came with responsibility, all because of a wrong turn on a dirt road, a boy on crutches who could run, and a girl without arms who wanted to heal others, all because sometimes life's most important moments aren't in the script, they're in the accidents, the mistakes, the unplanned encounters that show us who we really are and who we could become. The dawn was breaking over Angkor Wat when Angelina finally fell asleep, her phone still in her hand. The last call to her lawyer just ended. In a few hours she would be back on set, fighting fictional battles with special effects and stunt doubles. But the real fight had already begun, in a village whose name she could barely pronounce, with children whose faces she would never forget. This was how Angelina Jolie, Hollywood's rebel without a cause, finally found her cause, not in a script or a role or a public relations strategy, but in the eyes of children who had survived the unthinkable and still found reasons to smile, not in the spotlight of fame, but in the shadow of suffering that fame could help alleviate. Not all at once, but in a moment that would take a lifetime to fully understand and honor. The story would continue. Adoptions, marriages, divorces, more films, more humanitarian work, speeches at the UN, refugee camps in every corner of the world. But it all started here, in this night, in this decision, in this transformation from star to servant, from celebrity to citizen of the world. And somewhere in Cambodia, a boy on crutches was dreaming of tomorrow, not knowing that a movie star's promise to return would reshape not just his future but her own. Somewhere, a girl without arms was practicing writing with her feet, not knowing that her determination had shattered someone's understanding of what strength really meant. The cameras would roll again tomorrow. The film would be finished. The world would watch Angelina Jolie become Lara Croft, action hero. But the real action, the real heroism, had already begun in that hotel room, with those phone calls, with that irrevocable decision to use her life for something larger than herself. This was the night Angelina Jolie stopped being just a star and started being a force. This was the night the wild child grew up, not into tameness but into purpose. This was the night a wrong turn became the right path, and a Hollywood actress became a citizen of the world's forgotten places. The script was written, not by Hollywood, but by conscience, not for audiences, but for the children who needed someone to see them, to remember them, to refuse to forget that they existed and mattered. And Angelina Jolie, rebel with a cause at last, would spend the rest of her life following that script. One cleared mine, one built school, one saved child at a time.